Alright, a solo show. It's been a while, but let's do this.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yaniz Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. Normally on this show, we bring fans and critics together, kind of democratizing the film criticism world and allowing people to come on every episode, different guests, to discuss a film that really means something to them, that emotionally resonates with them or that they personally connected to, and bringing fresh voices to the world of film, as our slogan implies. So this episode, however, we're taking a break from that format to look back on 2018 and talk about some of the films that really meant something or that really connected to me personally. And I know everybody's making a best of list this time of year. I really don't like to call them best of lists just because I feel like a film that's technically superior to something on my list, and again, technically superior, I guess, is up to a matter of opinion. But I feel like the ones on here are just the ones that I prefer, that they aren't necessarily the best, and I'm not pretentious enough to declare, well, these are the best films of 2018. That's why I always like to call it my favorite films of 2018, my favorite movies or so. And so they're not necessarily the best. I also didn't see everything thanks to my 2018 Holiday Binge, in which I posted a review of a different 2018 film every day for the month of December. I did get the chance to catch up with a lot of films that I would have otherwise not been able to see, either that hit theaters in December or are still in limited release, or are like the little indie movies that probably would have escaped my radar had I not had an easy copy available. So, big shout out to the Online Film Critics Society, of which I'm a member, and the many studios that sent out award season screeners to that organization, because that was a tremendous help in helping me feel like I had a better handle on this list and 2018 as a year in film than I have in years past. So, if you want to read some of my 2018 Holiday Binge reviews, visit crookedtable.com and check those out. There's 31 of them, so chances are you'll find something interesting or to your interest. Also, I did consider mostly theatrical releases here, just because I was looking for reasons to kind of focus in the list, and unfortunately that means things that I liked, like To All the Boys I've Loved Before or Set It Up, wouldn't have really made the cut. But just like I said, I was looking for reasons to whittle down the list even more so. Both of those films, especially To All the Boys, I would absolutely recommend. So if you haven't seen that one on Netflix, definitely check that out. And I also did consider diversity in voices, in genres, that kind of thing, just so this wouldn't be like half superhero films, because this was a great year for comic book movies, with the exception of something like Deadpool 2, which I didn't really care for so much. So just a few notes to keep in mind before we delve into the episode. I will divide this episode into kind of two parts or sections. The first one is going to be my honorable mentions, so that's basically my 11 through 20 in alphabetical order, and we'll do the same for my top 10, just alphabetical order. I'm not really huge on necessarily feeling like I have to rank things, so I'm just go National Board of Review style and list them out in order, with a special shout out to probably my favorite one. If you're interested in other films that I enjoyed beyond those 20, you can go to crookedtable.com, and in this post for this episode, I will sprinkle in as many of the other titles that I really liked in the post as possible. So let's just jump into the honorable mentions without further delay here, starting with Blockers. Now, this is directed by Kay Cannon, who's known primarily as the screenwriter of the Pitch Perfect franchise, and from the outset, this really looked like just another sex comedy, just with a bit of a gender switch. And I think what you get when you focus on teenage girls and when you have a woman directing the film is you get a film that's much more based in character, much more based in emotion, and actually brings a lot more heart to its concept than you would initially expect. And I think not only with the performances of the three main girls, but also Leslie Mann, John Cena, and Ike Barinholtz, especially as someone that's a father of a young girl who will one day be facing this similar situation. I think, it really found a way of infusing the comedy with a lot of heart and emotionality. And, a lot of people this year, I think, are really praising Game Night, and I think that's a great film. And it's not quite in my honorable mention. Spoiler for the next few selections, I guess. But I think Blockers has it beat just because it has more range to it. And as much as I love comedies, I feel like most of the comedies I see engage so much in being silly and jokey that they forget to create characters that we can really care about. And, just expect you to get swept up in the ridiculousness of it all without really crafting something quite as memorable as other films, as creating characters. They focus on jokes over characters, and that's a real shame. And I think Blockers was an exception. Moving on, we're going to talk about Creed 2. This film, actually, I was really surprised. This did not have Ryan Coogler returning to direct it. So I think a lot of people were expecting it would be very subpar, and to some people it is. It's easy to say that it's not as fresh as the first Creed, and that's fair. And it's because of that, it's probably a weaker film. However, I think not only by delving into the history of Adonis Creed, but also talking about Rocky Balboa and serving as kind of a much delayed sequel to Rocky IV with the return of Dolph Lundgren and the Drago family. I think it really taps into the legacy of the franchise as well as the characters in a way that was very befitting of the concept of focusing on Apollo Creed's son in the first place. Not only that, I think it deepened the relationship between Michael B. Jordan's character and Tessa Thompson's in a really interesting and in some ways kind of profound way. As far as what happens with their relationship, I do think that also the performances are really strong across the board. Michael B. Jordan is proving that he's consistently one of the most underrated young actors. And while the fight scenes weren't as cinematic as the first film, I did feel like it did feel like a natural extension of all the themes that were going on, not only in the previous one, but in the 7 or the 6 before that. So it was a worthy addition to the Rocky franchise, and probably my third or fourth, probably my fourth favorite in the franchise after the original Rocky, Creed, and so it's like right up there for me. Our next film selection here is Isle of Dogs. I've never been a Wes Anderson stan. There's actually still a few of his films that I haven't seen. I should probably make that a goal for 2019 since his filmography is not even that deep. But I've always had a soft spot for stop motion, and the way that he tells the story. And I know it's gotten some controversy from critics for being sort of cultural appropriation, that kind of thing. And that's a fair criticism. And I understand the sensitivity with that. I also feel like the film really, in a way, is trying to pay tribute to Japan and there's that style of filmmaking and that culture. Maybe it doesn't always come across as genuine as it should, but I think the characters are really fun and really memorable, and it nails that Wes Anderson-y tone in such an interesting and specific way. You don't really realize how distinctive a voice Anderson has until you see a new film from him, and the fact that he can turn on a dime from tragedy to comedy and back again, always infusing his very specific brand of quirkiness and unexpected twists, and the film was a great example of quintessential Wes Anderson. So if you're a fan of Wes Anderson movies, you probably love this one or would love this one. If you find his films kind of obnoxious or overly pretentious, this is probably not for you, so just bear that in mind if you haven't seen Isle of Dogs. Going into the next selection here, from one animal to another, Paddington 2. So Paddington was a very big surprise for me in, 2014 or 2015? I forget when we saw it here stateside. I think it might have been early 2015 that Kai and I saw that one in theaters. So I was really surprised by the way that it's the kind of family film we don't get very often anymore, in that they don't pander to kids. There's no bodily jokes. There's no farts really or anything like that. It's really just focusing on wholesome entertainment, creating characters that kids can learn from or emulate, and it's just really a human story. And I don't think enough family entertainment, with the exception of Pixar, really understands that this is an opportunity to teach kids about compassion, about being a good person, about like real life lessons, about the importance of family and things like that. And I think Paddington really established such an interesting and unexpected tone with that. And Paddington 2 really just developed it even more so, focusing on the difference that one person can make in a community. And I think, you can see that in Paddington's influence that he had on the other inmates when he got imprisoned, and the magical transformative effect of his marmalade. I think you also get a standout performance, a BAFTA nominated performance from Hugh Grant as the villain. Just a really sweet and sweet, simple, but also complex emotionally film, and definitely one that deserves mention here. I know some people have actually even had it in their top 10s, and I can't really fault them for that. Paddington 2 it's a very special movie. Now we're going to talk about Sorry to Bother You. Now this was probably my biggest WTF release of the year, simply because I didn't really know anything about it. I knew it was very, very kind of strange. I knew that it was felt very unique, and I knew that it had something to do with race, but I wasn't exactly sure what device it was going to use to address that. So seeing this film that focuses so much on perception and kind of the pressures of race relations, but does so in a way that starts out very stylized and then gets even more bonkers from there, really surprised me. I think there are scenes in here that didn't quite hit me as well as I think they were hoping for, sometimes where the absurdity really gets a little over the top for my taste. But for the most part, there's a lot of director Boots Riley here, who's a first-time filmmaker, by the way, as was Kay Cannon for Blockers. I should have mentioned that. He creates something that nobody's ever seen before, and that alone is to be commended. There's a lot you can read into the subtext of where this movie goes, and some of it is a little bit of on the nose with the symbolism and things like that. But I think there's a lot to dig into here, and I have yet to actually watch this a second time. I would really love to do that. I think it would definitely reward repeat viewing. So hopefully I can get a chance to visit this again soon. And if you haven't seen Sorry to Bother You, which sadly kind of flew under the radar, I think, for a lot of people, it had a theatrical run that was over way too quickly, I would definitely check that out and give it a look, because it's an interesting and weird little film. Of course, now moving into Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This is one of the newest ones, I think, on this list as far as theatrical release. Actually, I think it might be the newest one. This was such a blast. I've been a fan of Spider-Man since the 90s cartoons, watching those, playing Maximum Carnage with my friends, like at a sleepover. I remember, like in the holidays, back in the early to mid 90s. And, when I'd heard about an animated Spider-Man, I was a little skeptical. Sony's history with the property, I mean, look at Venom. Sony's history with the property has been spotty at best. So I wasn't initially like psyched about a Spider-Man animated film, just because I was worried about the execution of it. And when I heard it was going to center on Miles Morales, I was familiar. I've heard of Miles Morales, but I'm not really steeped in that version of the character, so I didn't really know what to expect going into a Miles Morales Spider-Man tale. So the fact that this not only tells his origin story, but also ropes in the Spider-Verse comics, dealing with Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy and Spider-Ham and Spider-Man Noir and Penny Parker, and I think that was a really smart way to not only introduce the world to Miles Morales, the larger movie-going world, but also open up basically endless franchise opportunities for this series. So if they want, I know they're developing a Spider-Verse sequel. There's talk of doing a Spider-Gwen movie, which I think is a smart move because that was one of the standout characters for me as well. They could literally make movies of pretty much any of these characters and bring in other versions of the character, and it would totally fit with the established canon. It's very much emulating a comic book. You have the speech bubbles popping up. You have like the sounds written out, thwip at one point, which was a real highlight for me. And I think it honors the history of this character in a way that we haven't really seen before, which is why it's fitting that it has a Stan Lee tribute at the end. It's basically the Marvel equivalent of the Lego Batman movie, which I think does a similar sort of treatment to that character. Humorous, but also reverent to everything that has come before in the character's history. Okay, now next one we have Suspiria. So this one almost made my top 10. It was close, and it's probably the reason it didn't is because it took me a while to really figure out how I felt about this movie, because it does go to really dark and kind of crazy places, and it does feel a bit overlong to me. I'm not knocking it because it goes a little batshit towards the end. I think that was always kind of expected, at least on my end, with this film. I still haven't seen the original. I've been meant to go watch that before I saw the new one, but I did not get a chance to. And with the Holiday Binge, I've been focusing more on newer movies, so I'll definitely try and squeeze in a watch of the original Suspiria from Dario Argento, very soon. But this one I thought was a really interesting take on sort of a woman's coming of age and coming into her own, and using witchcraft as sort of the metaphor for that. And you have not only a really interesting performance from Dakota Johnson, but also a few interesting performances from Tilda Swinton. One of which in the lead up to this movie, they were being very cagey with whether or not she plays a particular role. And, I don't understand why she's not in the Best Supporting Actress conversation for this film, just because she does do so many different things. And I think people kind of take Tilda Swinton for granted at this point. The makeup effects in this film are bananas. I think it's definitely a shoo-in for that. And it's just a really, edge of your seat thrill ride. And it just made me feel very uneasy the whole time, which was obviously the intention. Tom York's score and his original songs really added to that as well. So, this is, I think it's an Amazon original movie, but I don't know if it's on Amazon Prime just yet. But if you're a horror fan and you haven't seen this, it did really not perform particularly well in theaters, unfortunately, as far as I know. So definitely track down Suspiria if you have any interest in the horror genre, or especially if you're a fan of Dario Argento's original. All right, next we're going to talk about Tully. So this I saw a couple times in theaters. I thought it was good, but the twist didn't really hit me as well as I would have hoped initially. When I rewatched it with Kai, actually, since the movie is so much about motherhood and the emotions that follow, balancing everything in your life. In the film, Charlize Theron actually has a trio of kids. So, I think as a parent, there's a lot of truth in this movie, a lot of harsh reality about what it's like to be a parent, to be a mother specifically, and how it can take a toll on you, and how a family needs to really stick together in order to overcome a lot of the adversities and obstacles that life throws at you, especially being a parent. And as a man, I was watching this the first time, as a father watching this the first time, feeling really, kind of underrepresented to start with. And I think that's kind of the point. A lot of men have a tendency to slip into complacency, letting the mother do everything for early childhood, especially like the first year or so of life. Just because if you're breastfeeding, as the movie addresses, there's not really a whole lot that we can do to soothe the child at that point. It really does kind of fall on the mother. And I think it's easy to forget that really can wear down on the moms out there. And this film really shines a light on that, on sort of a version of postpartum depression, and ultimately it has a really powerful message that really hits me as a father and a husband, and as a parent in general. So Tully is probably one of the best films that I saw last year that virtually nobody went to see. So if you're a fan of Jason Reitman, I would definitely check that out. Got great performance from Charlize Theron. That definitely deserves to be in the conversation this award season. All right, next, Widows. Steve McQueen, not the actor Steve McQueen, the director Steve McQueen, made a big impact with 12 Years a Slave, and coming back with Widows, which is essentially a female-led heist film. I think he finds a really interesting way to balance his more art house sensibilities and bring them to what is essentially a popcorn flick. I think there's a lot of great stuff going on in this movie, from Viola Davis, from Elizabeth Debicki, especially, from Michelle Rodriguez. And, the film packs a lot of twists in there. I feel like towards the end, it's a little bit unfulfilling, which is why it didn't quite make my top 10. But there's so much strong stuff going on here, from Daniel Kaluuya, from Brian Tyree Henry, just a really strong ensemble cast of characters, and a film that is marketed kind of as one thing, and I don't think it's really quite that. I think it's a lot more reflective of the genre than most heist films really are, than something like Ocean's 8, for example, which is all like kind of flash and not so much with the heavy thematics. And I think Widows, and this is sort of like what I said earlier about Kay Cannon's direction of blockers, when you bring a woman to a traditionally male genre or subject matter, I think it uncovers a lot of complexities that are otherwise missed by male filmmakers. And it's interesting that in this film, it's actually a man behind the camera, but he still has that sensibility, and these strong actresses in the camera starring in the film, kind of bringing out something new to this kind of material. And so all credit goes to the main ladies for that. Also want to give a shout out to Cynthia Erivo, who was a standout for me in Bad Times at the El Royale, and in this film as well. So definitely loved Widows. I think it's deserved a lot more love. I don't think it did particularly well at the box office. A lot of these, it's kind of a running theme with a lot of my favorite films this year, is that a lot of them kind of missed the casual moviegoers, which is a real shame. But I think it's available. It's either on demand or on Blu-ray already. So definitely track down Widows if you haven't. Lastly, and the last honorable mention here, we're going to talk about Joaquin Phoenix and You Were Never Really Here. I'd heard a lot about this film going in. This is another one from a female filmmaker. This is Lynn Ramsey here from We Need to Talk About Kevin. And I didn't know exactly what to expect. I knew it was really kind of a taut thriller and very intense, and that was basically sustained for the full runtime. But, with the aid of the score and a very committed performance from Joaquin Phoenix. Pardon my voice, I feel really stuffy this morning. I wasn't really prepared for how just how much this film really just focuses on the main character and his psyche and what's going on in his head, because the plot of it is pretty straightforward. He is this man that's paid to, basically kind of a mercenary, paid to save girls, paid to basically take people out, and when a job goes wrong, it kind of spirals out of control. But it really, more than it's focusing on the plot, this film is really about this man and everything he's endured and how that has shaped who he is and who he's become. And I think that was a really fascinating take on a kind of quasi-revenge thriller sort of deal. Phoenix has been known to deliver these really sort of transformative performances. And, if his take on the Joker is going to be anything like what he does here, I think we're in for something really, really impressive and kind of special. All right, here it is, the top 10, or my 10 favorite movies of 2018. As I mentioned with the honorable mentions, this is going to be in alphabetical order. So, I will make specific mention when I talk about what I consider probably my favorite film of 2018. But other than that, we'll just go in alphabetical order. So let's get started with Avengers Infinity War. Of course, this is on here. I feel like most years there's at least one MCU movie that makes my top 10. And, I feel like people criticizing this movie are really looking at it through the wrong lens. When it came out, I think it rightfully could receive criticism where, it just rushes along, the characters are underdeveloped, and it's just whatever, it's just a sprawling movie. But the point of this is that it's the culmination of 22, it's 22nd Marvel Cinematic Universe film. There is no, you can't judge this film for not establishing the characters or delving deep enough into them. A lot of them do have kind of arcs. Yeah, we don't get Captain America very much, but we get a lot of Iron Man, we get a lot of Doctor Strange. Really, the main character here is Thanos, and it's mostly sort of a first part of a two-part kind of quasi-season finale of the MCU, so you can't really judge it by the same criteria that you would something like Ant-Man and the Wasp, for example. So, to that regard, I feel like as a payoff for everything that's come before, we see the Guardians and the Avengers clash for the first time, or encounter each other for the first time. We see kind of the payoff of Thanos finally getting the Infinity Gauntlet, or at least trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet. I don't know, spoilers for the 2 people of you that haven't seen this. It's streaming on Netflix now, by the way, so you don't have any excuses left. The visuals look incredible. The score is great. The way in which the characters interplay and connect is a lot of fun. And I want to give a shout out specifically to not only Josh Brolin as Thanos and all the kind of nuanced work that he manages to convey with motion capture, but also Zoe Saldana, who I think has more to do as Gamora in this film than in both the Guardians movies. Yeah, she's in those movies and she has a pivotal leading role, but I feel like here we really get to know more about Gamora herself. And I'm really looking forward to, obviously this goes without saying, I'm really looking forward to Avengers Endgame. It's probably one of my top, possibly my most anticipated film of 2019, just because I'm really curious how they're going to follow this up and where they're going to take the franchise going forward. All right, next we have Black Klansman, which I was not expecting to love as much as I did. And the fact that this is, for those of you who don't know, this is the Spike Lee directed film based on real events of an African-American cop in Colorado Springs in the 1970s who went undercover as a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And, using another cop as sort of a doppelganger. I thought John David Washington and Adam Driver as the two sides of Ron Stallworth in this film were really, not only were they, great at the drama, at the dramatic stuff, because obviously this is a film dealing with racism, so there's a certain amount of heaviness that's unavoidable. But the film also infuses it gets a lot of comedy out of this kind of fucked up situation. And I think that was really impressive, that you find yourself laughing at it one moment, and then like you feel your heart sink the next. And it perfectly encapsulates sort of the complicated nature of racism in modern society, and how the more things change, the more they stay the same kind of thing. And, I thought it was really a masterful balance of tones that Spike Lee brought to this. And granted, I haven't seen all his films, but this definitely felt like at least a recent highlight for me from him. And I'm hoping it's one that gets a lot of Oscar love, just because it does. My thing with movies is that a lot of times it's the movies that I walk out of feeling like they accomplished something either that I'd never seen before, or that I didn't even know could be done on screen before. And Black Klansman, and there's a lot of the films in this top 10 I feel like fit this criteria. Black Klansman pulls off what I like to call sort of a magic trick in movies, where it makes a funny movie about racism that is also equally just as heavy and powerful as that subject matter deserves. So of course I was going to always make my top 10 list, but it wasn't one that I, going in, that I expected to really enjoy and kind of admire that much. Next film here we're going to talk about is Black Panther. This is the second Marvel Cinematic Universe film on this list. And I was not initially really looking to put two Marvel movies on here. There's, in the past, I think when I've had a Marvel film in my top 10, it's usually been one, definitely not two from the same franchise. So this is the first time that that's ever happened. But I think it's a testament to the fact that I believe Infinity War and Black Panther are the two best films that the MCU has made to date. I was saying earlier about how Infinity War can't really be judged by the same criteria as the solo films. Black Panther obviously is a solo film, so I'm judging it based on the same kind of perspective that I'd bring to Iron Man or an Ant-Man film or a Captain America film. But to me, this film is the first one in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to really say something about society at large. It has the most social context and social commentary. And, it feels like the first MCU film that's really about something. And for that reason, it rises to the top as not only the best in the MCU, but probably my favorite film of 2018. I think Chadwick Boseman is really great here, and really brings a regal and conflicted presence to this role. Michael B. Jordan delivers an amazing performance that I hope gets some big nominations in the months ahead. But not only that, I feel like the way the world building here, the fact that Wakanda actually feels like a real place. We had 3 Thor movies, and ultimately they couldn't make Asgard feel tangible, to the point that the third Ragnarok's big finale ends up declaring that Asgard is a people and not a place, just because nobody cares about the place, I guess, is a good reason for that. In this film, you care about Wakanda, you care about the side characters like Shuri and Nakia, you feel, and Okoye, let's not forget her, she's great. All the characters are lovable, and you want to see more of them. And the score by Ludwig Göransson is tremendous. The visuals, the way it's shot, the costume design, everything about this film to me is astounding. Yeah, there's a little stuff in the finale where it gets a little template-y to me, a little formulaic with the Marvel comics, where the hero is fighting a bad version of himself, which tends to happen in pretty much every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. This is the first film where it actually didn't bother me. I think mostly because it kind of fit, it fit the story, in that Killmonger was trying to sit on the throne of Wakanda, so they're competing for the same role. So it makes sense that they would sort of have similar looks in the final fight. And yeah, some of the CG's a little overblown, that kind of thing, but not only, everything else seems to be perfectly in place. So this is to me, a kind of a near perfect comic book film. Definitely one that I've already revisited a few times, as well as kind of incessantly played the soundtrack. So, Black Panther, easily my favorite movie of the year. So I mentioned at the front of this podcast that the 2018 Holiday Binge really helped me feel like I had a handle on the year in film, and that I could confidently make these lists knowing that I'd seen most of the big highlighted movies. So this is a perfect example of that, because this film that I'm about to talk about is the first on this list that I only saw because of the 2018 Holiday Binge. And even at that rate, it was one of a late addition to that schedule that I almost forgot to sneak in there. Of course, I'm talking about Blind Spotting, which is by far kind of the most underrated and least discussed, other than in film Twitter, film of the year. I did not plan it this way, but this is the third consecutive film that I'm talking about here that deals heavily with race, that comes from, a filmmaker of color. And I was not planned that way, I promise you. It's just the way the alphabet kind of lands. And this is a film starring Daveed Diggs and Rafael Casal, where they play best friends, co-workers for a moving company in Oakland. And the story is told through their perspective, delving into all kinds of issues regarding race, as far as identity and racial politics and, police brutality and a lot of, it's, as I mentioned in my review on crookedtable.com, it's both sort of a condemnation of and a love letter to the city of Oakland, where both of these actors actually grew up, and they knew each other when they were kids. So the fact that they not only star in the film together, but also wrote the screenplay together and also sort of dominate the soundtrack, which is very, very, very tied to the hip hop community, is you can feel it in the film. It feels like a personal project to them, and you can tell that this is something that really means a lot to them as artists. So I obviously Black Panther and Black Klansman even are kind of more palatable films about race, but Blind Spotting it's a heavy movie, but it's also kind of like Black Klansman. It has a lot of levity in it throughout and looks at it from a very specific lens. And for the finale alone and like the emotional gut punch that it delivers, I think this is definitely one worth watching. And it baffles my mind that Daveed Diggs is not leading the Best Actor race right now, because he is incredible in this movie in every sense of the word. And the fact that Blind Spotting is so little seen and so little recognized for everything that it accomplishes, I think is one of the biggest travesties of 2018 cinema. So hopefully we'll get at least a screenplay nomination, something for that, because this is a really outstanding film that completely took me by surprise, even though I'd heard it was great. So Blind Spotting, definitely check that out. Moving on to Crazy Rich Asians. First of all, I gotta explain, not only am I a huge fan, obviously, if you've listened to this podcast and you've heard me allude to my political leanings and stuff over the years, all about diversity, all about seeing more people on screen, more different voices on screen, behind the camera, and all that stuff. However, with that in mind, I also grew up with a lot of rom-coms. My mom is, as you heard on the podcast a couple weeks ago, she loves, she's really big into sentimentality. She loves watching romantic movies. So a lot of Nora Ephron, a lot of Nancy Meyers, a lot of, and the sad thing is that a lot of those romantic comedies are really terrible. And so we don't, probably because of that, a lot of moviegoers have stopped going to see them, which is why, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, probably one of the best rom-coms of the year is a Netflix film, because very few of them ever get big theatrical, releases at this point. I think Crazy Rich Asians is probably the best in a long while that we've seen, not only from a comedic standpoint, but in a romantic standpoint, hence the rom-com part of it all, and from representation, but also just like, there are sequences in this film that are really, I'm thinking specifically of the wedding scene. There are sequences of this film that are really beautiful, and it says a lot to say about the endurance of love, about the importance of making peace with your significant other's family. I think Michelle Yeoh is great in this. I think Constance Wu is great in this. Henry Golding is great in this. Awkwafina is great in this. It's such a great cast, and the fact that they're all Asian or American actors, but this is not a token slot. I know some people some more cynical people listening to this list might be like, well, he mentioned up front about diversity, and so he's just putting a lot of things in here. It's like affirmative action as far as film is concerned. But this film actually literally hit me really hard, and felt like a throwback to those really quality, well-made rom-coms that I grew up with. The fact that it brought Asian Americans to the forefront in a way that we haven't seen on this scope before made it feel all the more special to me as a moviegoer, as a film critic, as a student of pop culture. So Crazy Rich Asians, probably one of the ones on here that more people have seen other than Black Panther, but definitely one that was worthy of being on here. And if you haven't read the books, check out the books as well. And thankfully, we're going to get sequels coming soon. Now, the next one is the second film from the 2018 Holiday Binge that I only just saw a couple weeks ago. And man, was it great. So I'm talking about Bo Burnham's 8th Grade. This is another small movie that a lot of people didn't see other than film critics, apparently. Stars Elsie Fisher as a 8th grader. It's just kind of on the verge of beginning her high school years. And for obvious reasons, I've never been a teenage girl, but I think the film touches on sort of a universal truth about being this age, about not feeling like you belong as a kid, or not feeling like you're not a kid anymore, but also not feeling like you fit in with the adults. You don't fit in with your peers. You're kind of trapped in this weird adolescent limbo, and you don't know how to conduct yourself. You don't know what to do at parties. You don't know how to talk to people, or you're always second guessing everything you do. I mean, I'm very introverted, so I kind of still feel that way to an extent. So I think this film really captures what it feels like to be that age and to deal with those issues, especially for the modern era. I'm in my mid-30s, so I didn't have to deal with social media and all that stuff when I was a teenager. It wasn't even a thing yet until like my grad school years and things like that. So 8th Grade finds a way of taking something that's easily relatable, but making sure that it comes from a current prism where today's teenagers can really resonate with it. So not only is there a lot of humor to be kind of yielded from this premise, but there's some real dramatic heft involving the character Kayla and her father, and again, feeling as I come to a lot of these movies from the standpoint of a husband and father now, and I did a whole podcast on this last year of how being, or maybe even the year before that, I did a whole podcast on this a while back about how being a dad has changed the way I watch movies. You can find that on crookedtable.com or in the Apple Podcasts or Spotify feeds for the show. So that part of it, I connected with the father character as much as I connected to the girl, the main girl. So it's definitely a film to worthwhile checking out if you've ever been an adolescent or a parent of an adolescent. I think in the latter case, you'll probably enjoy it even more. Okay, moving on to the favorite, which is not my favorite film of the year, but it was in my top 10. It's definitely, I've been a tentative fan of Yorgos Lanthimos ever since I saw Dogtooth. I liked some of The Lobster. I feel like the second half kind of loses its way a little bit. But of all the films I've seen by him, The Favorite is easily, my favorite. And I think that really ties back to not only the fact that he created a unique take on the period piece, but he, it features 3 outstanding performances from Olivia Colman, Rachel Weisz, and Emma Stone. But it has such a dark, wry sense of humor, and it's probably one of the most daring films of the year, and where it goes with its subject matter, with the relationships between the 3 women, and just the forthrightness with which it handles that. It says a lot about power dynamics. It says a lot about relationships between women. It says a lot about I don't know. It says a lot about the vindictiveness that people can inflict on one another when they feel like they're in competition. And I think the film brings such a interesting and unique take on this kind of film, far beyond anything we've seen before. And yeah, there's a certain level of weirdness and quirkiness that Lanthimos brings to it. I'm thinking specifically of scenes where like Emma Stone is involved in, without spoilers, involved in a very specific activity, but is completely detached from it because her mind is hyper focused on getting in good with the queen and sort of improving her social status and things like that. And this sort of the contrast between different ideals, different goals, different motivations, I think it really makes this film kind of stand out as one of the best comedies of the year, but also definitely one of the best made films of the year, as far as the cinematography, as far as the acting, as far as the score, the costume design. So I'm thrilled to see that this is getting a lot of critical love. And, I think all of that is well deserved. Lanthimos continues to get better and better. And this feels like the perfect distillation of his storytelling sensibility. All right, now we have Hereditary, which I remember coming out of this press screening for this one, and you always have the PR people standing outside being like, "What did you think?" And I remember just being like, "What? I don't even know. I need to process. I need to marinate on this a little bit." And throughout the film, I think even early on, I was really floored by Toni Collette's performance. I remember kind of whispering to myself or like thinking to myself, damn, Toni Collette is a beast in this. And she really is. She does. She shifts from creepy to angry to like sympathetic to and back again, like constantly. And she's probably one of the most unappreciated actresses right now, I think, because if you look back at her career, yeah, everybody knows her from The Sixth Sense and Muriel's Wedding and things like that, but she has done, if you watch the Shaft movie from 2000, she's great in that movie, and that's like ultimately not the best role. She's just kind of the damsel in distress victim that Shaft is trying to help out, basically. But every movie she pops up in, she is flawless in it. Hearts Beat Loud, she had a small role in that this year. And her performance really anchors this film in an incredible way. This is another first-time filmmaker. There's a lot of them this year on my top 20, I guess. And director Ari Aster brings I don't even know how to describe it, but he connects like supernatural horror with family drama in a way that has never been done before. And there are things in this film, there are images in this movie that will haunt me for the rest of my life. And, the ending is just like, I've never seen it's rare that I see a finale of any film, let alone a horror film, that just has this sort of sustained dread in it where you're just like breathless as far as waiting to see how this is going to pan out and what note this film is going to leave you on. And Hereditary really felt that way. Probably one of the most graphic films of the year in a lot of ways, and definitely not one that Kai has any interest in seeing because of that. But the craft in here is so strong. The acting, as I mentioned, especially Toni Collette, that it absolutely had to make my list. Plus, I like to try and keep at least one of my top 10 slots for a horror film. In the past, it's been like Don't Breathe. I think last year was It. So Hereditary definitely felt like the standout horror film for me this year. Granted, I haven't seen a lot of them, but stick around for crookedtable.com for the Rewind Wednesdays, and hopefully I'll have reviews of more 2018 horror films that I missed out on in the coming weeks. But as far as what I did see, Hereditary was the easy winner. All right, now this other one, which I did not see in theaters, unfortunately, even though I'd heard good things, is Love, Simon. And I think a lot of people kind of dismissed this film, saying that, oh, well, it's 2018, there's the LGBTQ community has a lot of representation, and do we really need a movie like this now? And I think that is completely wrong-headed thinking, and Love, Simon is a more Hollywoodized version of the story than we've seen in the past, and it certainly captures a lot of the awkwardness of being a teenager and sort of the uncertainty of knowing who you are and what your place in the world is, in a way like eighth grade handles a lot of those themes in a different way. But I think that's part of what makes Love, Simon so relevant, is that in this film, the main characters, Simon's parents, are very liberal. He has friends that are cool. He's not worried necessarily about how they'll react. He's more just coming to terms with himself. And I think that's a theme that, no matter your orientation, that's a theme that you can connect to regardless. Not only that, but the story, which I knew basically nothing about going in, has this really interesting structure where, so I guess I should probably just outline the premise of the film. So he finds out via Simon, played by Nick Robinson, finds out that in his school there is another gay person. There's sort of a website that's kind of a blog that you can post on if you go to the school that Simon attends, and he finds out that there's another gay man at his school. So he's sort of trying to find out who that is, and strikes up a online conversation, like an email chain back and forth with this person who calls himself Blue. So it's throughout the course of the film, he's tried to imagine who it is and solve the mystery and that kind of thing while protecting his own secret. And I think that was such an interesting way of handling the story of the coming of age of a young gay man, and the central mystery is really compelling, and the way that the film handles it, kind of shifting perspectives and giving you exploring all the possibilities from Simon's perspective, as in, well, if it's this person, how would that look and how would that sound? And, it's, I don't know, it was a film that I've seen twice now, and both times it felt really, the characters that it creates are not only great within the context of the film, but they're actually memorable, and they're actually characters that I want to revisit and spend time with. The little friend group in the center, everybody has their own story, and the way that they all play off against each other. It's definitely a film that I think is pertinent right now, just because it does handle the story of a young gay man in such a liberal atmosphere, and brings such heart and compassion to that, and strong ensemble across the board. And I hadn't really seen anything from Greg Berlanti as a film director. I watched The Flash and Supergirl and things like that, Riverdale, of which he's a producer on, and is he a co-creator on this? I'm not sure exactly, but I was really impressed with his work here, and I thought that Love, Simon is, I have a tendency to be a real sucker for some of these YA adaptations, like The Fault in Our Stars made my list, I think, a few years back. So Love, Simon definitely tapped into that hardcore. All right, the last one in my top 10, because you knew I had to mention this because it's amazing. Mission Impossible Fallout. This is from writer-director Christopher McQuarrie, who's the first returning director in the franchise after doing Rogue Nation in 2015. And I don't know how he keeps finding ways to top himself, and I don't know how this franchise keeps getting better and better, but this is the 6th Mission Impossible film, and I feel like it is without a doubt the best. I was kind of on the fence for a little bit with that, but then when I saw it a second time, I was like, yeah, no, this is the best. I mean, the Halo jump sequence, the bathroom fight, the whole thing at the end with the helicopter, and the mountaintop battle, everything in this film is just pushes the limits of what you can do in an American action film. As far as the stunt work is concerned, as far as the visual effects, as far as the dramatic stakes, and it taps into the history of the franchise in a way that we've rarely seen before by bringing back Michelle Monaghan and in addition to Simon Pegg and Ving Rhames and things like that, Rebecca Ferguson. And Henry Cavill is amazing in this as sort of the wild card, I guess, of the team. It's just a real achievement as far as action filmmaking is concerned. This is easily one of the best action films I've seen in years, and one that I can't wait to watch on Blu-ray. I do own the Blu-ray. I've got it for Christmas as of my own request, and it's Tom Cruise is great in it, and it really actually, even 6 films in, it even actually has something to say about Ethan Hunt as a man and what makes him different, and the kind of the sacrifices that he makes in order to be the hero that he knows he has to be, and the fact that he actually cares about one person as opposed to, that he actually cares about one person as much as 1,000 people. And I think the fact that all human life matters to him, and they really adds a lot of wrinkles to his character, in addition to really expanding the scope of the action itself, and the storytelling in general. And you should, if you haven't listened to them, definitely go listen to the Empire film podcast, and hear the multiple interviews they did with Macquarie about his process and the ordeal that was making this movie, because it's really impressive, especially when you hear firsthand from the filmmaker how he pulled this off. It's even that much more impressive that he pulled it off and that he did it so well. So Mission Impossible Fallout was always going to make my list, just because I'm a huge fan of the franchise, and it is incredible what the images that he was able to capture, and the story that he's able to wrap around those unbelievable action sequences. So that's my top 10/20 of 2018. Again, this is it's a completely subjective list. Your mileage may vary with all of these films. I would be interested, if you've seen any of these movies, what you thought of them. So send me your thoughts on Twitter at Crooked Table, or over email robert@crookedtable.com, and tell me what your top 10 films of the year were, or what you thought of the ones that I chose. I think 2018 was overall a really great year for cinema. There's, as I mentioned at the top, there's still some I'd like to check out. So stay tuned to crookedtable.com for more of those reviews going forward. But the fact that I was able to make not only a top 10, but a top 20, and then expand it out to a lot of other films. I mean, there was probably a good, and I don't see as many films as a lot of film critics just because I don't have the time. But there was a good, probably 40 to 50 films that I really, really liked / loved this year. This just happens to be sort of a, smattering of the ones that I liked the most. But, my relationship to movies is very flexible. So I might watch one of these movies down the line and not like it as much. I might see some of the ones that didn't make my list and appreciate them in a whole new way. Or I might discover something new that will push one of these films out of my top 10 or 20. So that's the great thing about movies, is that your relationship to them changes over time. And you get a new experience with each subsequent viewing, at least the best movies. So definitely go and watch the ones that I mentioned. Let me know what you like this year. And, thanks for listening to the Crooked Table podcast. Next week, we'll be back with our regular format. I appreciate you kind of taking this little detour with me, but I always like retrospectives and looking back on a year in film. So 2018 felt like a really special one, and hopefully we'll have even more great films ahead in 2019. If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.